All right, I guess we're live right now. So this is my first live streaming, and so forgive me if I look a little bit out of place. But let's get started. So first, let me make sure that we are online because I don't even know if we are. Yeah, it looks like we are online. Yeah, we are. Okay. Just give me 1 second. I'm gonna explain to you very briefly what this live streaming will be about. Um, so hi, my name is Anthony Rodriguez, and so I decided to create this live stream just to talk about a important topic. Well, it's probably not important, but I want to talk about Python, and it's a programming language that I don't know. But a friend of mine asked me to make an introduction about it, and that's what I'm planning to do. But why Python? That's a good question, and I think the most accurate answer has to do with this image here. So this is basically the trend of programming languages in 2022, and you see that Python grew 22.5% this year, and which means that it's a programming language that it's becoming more popular. JavaScript keeps being one of the most favorite programming languages. It keeps being the number one for a long time, at least since 2014, which is a graph that I have here. And PHP, for instance, is a programming language that is decreasing in popularity. So let's take a look at this graph, for instance, to validate my point. You see that since 2014, JavaScript has become it's been the most favorite programming language. It's been the number one, and then you have Python, and that's why we're talking about Python today here, and it's because it keeps being a very popular programming language, and I'm going to explain to you why. And but let's talk about other programming languages as well, like Java, TypeScript, and look at TypeScript, for instance. It became very relevant in this year, starting in 2018. And it all has to do with the popularity with JavaScript. So TypeScript serves like as a type programming language, if you will, to guarantee um, types in a non-typed programming language like JavaScript, and that's why the popularity. And then you have C Sharp, C++, PHP, Shell, C, and Ruby. Look at Ruby. Like, he went from being in number five to pretty much all the way to the bottom. Um, so here we can also see the growing or the speed of growth for these programming languages. And you see HCL has become the number one programming language and as one of the fastest growing programming languages. This is a HashiCorp programming language. It has to do with DevOps. That's where its popularity or that's where its implementation relies, mostly for DevOps, which means DevOps is a field that is growing in demand, and that's why this programming language is making sense. And then you have Rust, which is another fast-growing programming language, and you have TypeScript again, Lua, Go is another popular one, and you have Python at the bottom. So even though Python is not growing really fast, its implementation um, or its usage is high. You can see it's the second one here. It was the third. It was in the third place, but it's been growing in popularity according to this survey from 2022. So let me go back here and talk a little bit briefly about why Python has become really important, and why it's still relevant, especially if you work or you are intending to work with data. So number one, Python has been a very popular programming language because it's easy. It's easy to learn, easy to implement, and because of that, multiple companies have been adopting it, especially startups. Because most of the people coming out from college, they learn Python, and so you have a lot of developers with this knowledge, and companies want to get people um, with knowledge on Python because it's like I said, it's easy, so it's very convenient. So a lot of companies start using this programming language because there's so many people that know it, and again, because it's really easy to learn. So you're gonna find this programming language as a one of the favorite programming languages in and different fields. For instance, in data analytics, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and also on web development. Um, so Python is a programming language that doesn't focus on just one paradigm, like for instance, object-oriented programming or functional programming or structured programming. It performs or it gives you flexibility to literally just focus on any of this paradigm, and that's another thing that makes this programming language a very attractive one. It is also useful for extracting data. Um, you can find this programming language used in places where you need to extract, model, and also streamline data. Let's imagine like one of those cases, for instance, like iterating through CSV files and extracting data, um, modifying that data into different columns or rows, and like and handling that data. So it's a programming language that gives you a lot of tools, a lot of modules that are really relevant when it comes to extracting data or handling data. Like I said, artificial intelligence is another field where Python has become really, really important. And again, it had to do with the fact that a lot of people know Python, and also because it's really easy. Not necessarily because it's the most performant one, but it's the again, I go with the fact that it's a very easy programming language to learn, and also because of it, like it has a lot of tools, modules, and elements that people find useful. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you need to do something, right? Like for instance, if you need to read a CSV file and you want to access cells or columns or rows, you don't have to build that yourself, but instead use a library or module from the different type that exist, and then just implement it. The same thing for machine learning or artificial intelligence. Like for one of those packages include Panda, and for data handling you have NumPy, for instance. And those modules are really important and really useful, which means that because of it, because of the community behind all these tools, you can become more efficient when it comes to building software, building solutions, especially if you're a small company and you don't have a lot of resources and you need things to get done very quickly. Like I said, also Python is really important for working on the web. Um, so it has frameworks like Django, for instance, or Flask that are again come really handy in order when you need to implement web solution very quickly. Um, Also, I would say that another reason why learning Python would be also cybersecurity. It's a programming language that has proven to be very secure. It's implemented in multiple important applications or solutions, and it keeps being reliable. So that's the motivation behind why you should learn Python, and that's pretty much the motivation of behind this video. It's pretty much to kick off a introduction to the programming language and its basics components. Like I said in the beginning, I don't know Python. I know other programming languages. I know Rust, JavaScript, Scala, PHP, and other tools on top of, for instance, JavaScript. You have the React framework, but I don't know Python. Like I had the opportunity to learn it before, but I've been focusing on other tools, um, getting more experience on the current programming languages that I know. Python, even though it's become a really apparent solution, tools for the market, I never considered learning it. So this might be the opportunity to learn it. And like I said, all this started with one of my friends asking me to do a brief introduction on this programming language and kick off a um, live learning session or boot camp, if you will, where we just together go through the programming language and trying to learn it. So let me see what we have here. Okay, so I'm reading comments from my friends. Well, let's at least cover how to install this runtime environment. So we know that Python is a programming language, but you can also think about it as a runtime environment where, like any other, basically has specific definitions and structure that need to be um, presented to this interpreter or this running environment for it to understand it. And that's where the learning aspect starts, right? And those are the things that we're planning to learn. So the first thing that we need to figure out is how to install Python. Obviously, there are many ways of installing Python. Oh, actually, I have some comments here from people that are watching the live stream. So thank you guys. It's also the first time I use any of these tools, like doing this broadcasting. I'm just using my previous experience dealing with this type of softwares and things. So forgive me if I'm missing something or I'm just doing this in a nervousness way. Okay, so let's talk about briefly how to install Python. So depending on your operating system, it's gonna differ, right? I have macOS here, and there are multiple ways of installing it. You can use Brew, or you can just download the binary and install it. But if you have any other, if you're running on other operating systems like Windows or Linux, there are specific instructions on how to download it. You only have to go to python.org and go to the downloads section and here and just follow the instruction. And that's what I did. Well, actually, I didn't do that because Python comes installed on macOS, so it's available. And let me show you here. For instance, let me just clear this window briefly and show you that that is true. So here I have a terminal down here, and you can see if I type Python 3 version, I have the current version of Python installed, which is the 3.9.6, and that is the version that I'm using. So it's pretty much like if you take a look at this image here, you see that they have the 3.11.0 available, and I have the 3.9.6 available, which is still fine, right? And it doesn't matter that we don't have any of the new changes available on this version, still relevant. So after knowing how to install this programming language or runtime, we have to understand how to use it. And like you saw me doing here, you see that I have my command Python 3. Let me see. Let me clear this. And when I run it, I don't know why my computer's a little slower now. So when I run it, did you see that I'm presented with this information, with this tool? Let me open it a little more. So I have my terminal and I type Python 3 and I get presented with this window, and you can see that I can input anything and hit enter, and then I get some information back. Again, I don't know why my let me see, this is a little slow, I don't know why. And this is a this is what is called a interactive a terminal. So it's basically a terminal where we can interact with the interpreter. If we give specific information to this terminal, to this uh, interactive interpreter, it's gonna understand Python, right? And this is pretty much a runtime, right? A one that is running on your terminal and you can interact with. Like for instance, if I want to add two numbers, like here, if I say 2 plus 2 and I hit enter, then I get 4, which means that Python understands that this is a arithmetic operation. It's an addition. So I'm adding two numbers together and then I get a response. I can, for instance, print a string. I'm going to talk about that later. I don't know if I'm going to do it in this video, but you can print out strings like, hey, hello. And when you hit enter, so Python understands that and does exactly that. So you get hello, you get hello back as an output. So it might come in handy if you want to interact with the programming language, and so you can use this interactive tool and just play with it. Like for instance, you can assign a value to a variable, and you see we haven't gotten to that part yet, but you can see that I can have something called a variable, like for instance text, and I can assign a value. Let's assign another string like Anthony, and then hit enter. Nothing happens. But if I print whatever value is stored in that variable, you see that the value is output. It's outputted here. So by running Python, in this case on the macOS, Python 3 on the terminal gives you access to this interactive tool for you to interact with the runtime environment. Another way, and this is obviously the way that the runtime environment is used, is by giving it a file, right? So let me just exit. The way that you exit is just typing exit with parentheses, and then you go back to the terminal session. So now you are at the user level here. So let me see. Let me just close this here, and I have my text editor here. I'm using the VS Code 1, which is not responsive on my screen. I don't know what's going on. So let's see. I knew I was gonna have some issues, but okay. Let me just open the terminal again. Well, actually, we don't have to. So I have a file here. I created this file called hello.py. The py stands for Python. It's not necessary on macOS, but I just added here just to visualize that this is a Python file, right? So let's do the same thing, right? So let's print out, for instance, hello world, right? And so how do we run this? Well, on VS Code, you see that you have a play button here. When you hit this button, you pretty much so basically the VS Code execute the command Python 3 and appends the file. In this case is the hello.py file, and then the file is executed, and you see that the output is pretty much the same thing that we got before when we were using the interactive tool. So let's go back. What else can I talk about here? So I can also do that myself, right? Again, if I type Python 3 and I give it the location of this file, which is workspace source, and then let me see. Source, and I have Python, and then hello Python. Like if I run it myself as well, gets the same result. So you see that when I hit the play button, I had my text editor to run the command for me, which is what it's doing here. But now I'm doing it myself, right? On the terminal, I'm just typing that and running this file. And we're running Python for the first time. And that's pretty much what we need to get it started. I don't know how that is on other operating systems, but on macOS, that's all you have to do. So far, we've been able to learn how to install the programming language. Also, we learned about the interactive um, um, interface or command line that we were using to interact with Python. It's a REPL, and also how to run Python by pointing to a Python file. So when you give the interpreter a Python file, it knows how to understand it, right? And also we learn how to create a variable and how to print out a string, which is really cool that we know that already. All right, let me see what else. Just give me 1 second, because my text editor keeps freezing. All right. So let me see. Yes, Steven, we can do numbers as well. So I got a question asked about doing numbers, and that is exactly what I had planned here. But first, let me see if I can fix this issue I have with the text editor. So I'm gonna close it and open it again. I'm doing that. Just give me 1 second. I'm gonna open Visual Code again and open my file. All right. So I have the file here. Hopefully it works. And let me see if it's still valid. Yeah, still works here. All right. Perfect. All right. So let's work with numbers. So this is gonna be okay. So first, like I mentioned before, the way that we create a variable on Python is just, you don't have to use any special keyword like in other programming language, like in JavaScript, for instance. You create a variable with the keyword var, or with the keyword let, or with the keyword const. In Python, you don't need any of that, at least as far as I learned. You only need to specify a name, like for instance, a, right? So a is a variable here, and we can assign. So when we have a equal sign element here, it means that we are assigning a value to it. And you can assign anything, right? You can assign a string, like for instance, hello, or you can assign a number like 1, right? You don't have to add any quote, you just add the number. And you're gonna find yourself using this a lot, but you can also do operations like we saw before. You can have c like for instance, let me add another number like c equal to 2, and then sum equal, there's a variable also. Like for instance, we can say, let me call this sum 1 plus 2, or we can say sum 2 equal to b plus c, right? So here we created the sum1 variable, and we're assigning a operation. This is an addition, right? And we are and the elements of these operations are what we call primitives. Primitives. Yeah, primitives. They are pretty much values that are pretty much the most fundamental parts of a programming language. Like for instance, you have two integers here, and we can talk about types later. I don't even know what is the type definition on Python. So once I do a little bit of research, we're going to talk about that. But so far we have two primitives here. You have the primitive one and primitive two. So those are literals. And we are adding them, and then we assign them to a sum1 variable. But also we can do operations on variables, right? So you have b plus c, and then you assign that result to the sum2 variable. So if we run this, you can see that we don't get any result, right? We don't get any result on the terminal. We only see hello.python being executed and nothing got printed out because we're not saying it, that we are not indicating that we want that output to be sent to the um, uh, to the terminal's output, if you will. So to do that, this is a function that we are going to use a lot, which is print. So print is a function that sends the output of whatever you pass in to the how do you call that? Well, we can say to the system's output. Like for instance, if we want to print out A, we just specify like that. You have B, C, and also the result of sum1 and sum2, for instance. And you see that when you execute the script now, you have hello, you have 1, you have 2, and you have 3 because it demonstrates that you can pretty much use direct literals or primitives for the operations, or you can use variables, and that's where the magic of or like the essence of a programming language comes from, where you can pretty much assign values to different position on the hip and pretty much just move things around and process those complex executions, right? So far we learned that about numbers. We learned about how to create a variable and how to output those operations on the terminal or back to the client, to whatever it's executing this runtime environment. So let's dive into numbers. So as you can see, I've been using I've been doing addition here, but you can also do subtractions, multiplications, or divisions. For instance, if we change this, the sign for multiplication is the star, and for division is the the forward slash. So if I run the script again, you see that if you pay attention to the last two, you have the 1 times 2 equals 2, and 1 divided by c, or 1 divided by 2 is 0.5. But there's a new number that or a new type of number that is now presented to us, and this is a float, or what we call a decimal number here, right? So, but we can talk about that later. Let's focus on the type of operations that we can do so far using Python and the syntax available. The order on how the order of how you describe, or the order you describe the elements that get involved in operations are is really important, and that's why we have other types of operators like parentheses to do grouping. Like for instance, if I do 0.5 plus b, let me see. Well, I'm gonna do 1 plus b divided by c, and let me just remove all of this and just focus on sum 1. And also you can see that my text editor here, my code editor or my IDE is identifying that there's an issue, and we can talk about that later, later. So you see it's telling me that something is wrong with it. Like for instance, someone is not defined, and we can talk about what's not defined is later. But pretty much when something is not defined, it means that it hasn't been defined. Like it's as simple as that. But yeah, the code editor can help you a lot when it comes to debugging any issue, and that we can talk about that in another lesson. So you see here that, oh, well, actually I deleted B and C, and you see the code editor is telling me, hey, there's an error. I don't see B, I don't see C, so let's create them. So for instance, we can say B equals to 2 and C equals to 4. Let me see. Well, I'm gonna call this B equal to 1. Well, actually, let's do B4, and this is 1. Let me see. Let me make it, let me make it 3 so that we divide by 2. Yeah. So when we run this, and let me call this result, and then result here. So we're assigning numbers to variable and also an operation to a variable as well. And then we're printing out the result here. So when I execute the command, I see 2.5, and let's see if that's true. So you have 1 plus b, which is 3, that gives you 4. 4 divided by 2 should be 2. Why are we getting 2.5? So that's an interesting question and an interesting outcome. And it all has to do with the priority in which those operations are executed. So basically what's going on is that B divided by C is happening first. Like you have 3 divided by 2, and then you adding 1 that gives you 2.5. And the reason is because depending on the programming language, it's, well, I don't know if that's something universal or they all share the same rule, but Python seems to adhere to a rule that I know, and is that the division happens first. So you can think of it as in this is pretty much happening first, and then the result is being added to 1. So a rule of thumb to make sure that when you have a combination of addition and division are executed as expected, make sure to use this tool that we have available, which are parentheses, to indicate that this two should be computed together before anything else happen. Like, so do not follow like natural behavior when you're not using any parentheses to basically group the operations. And you see here that we get 2. So this is really, really important, because if we don't do that, we can fall into, imagine that you are doing operations like this on a huge number of data, large data set, and but you made the mistake of not making sure that the operation was the one that you really intended to. So the programming language will be like, oh, I see that my rule is doing division or multiplication first, and then adding that to whatever is next. So the order doesn't give you any indication of what's gonna happen, because if you read it from left to the right, you're gonna think like, okay, 1 plus b is 4, and then divide that by 6. That's not how the program language is being taught to do these operations. First, does division or multiplication, and then if there's any addition or subtraction, it's gonna do it next, regardless of the order. If you want to guarantee that something happens first, so make sure that you use this parentheses right here. You can also add a parenthesis here, but it's not needed, right? And you see you have two, and that can go like well beyond, like you can keep adding more parentheses, right? It's gonna get respected, because if you have any other operations like this, right, you have to make sure that this is executed first and then add it to this, so we don't fall into the same issue. Like for instance, if we have something like this, right, you know, this is gonna happen first and then it's gonna be added to C, and you can play with that literally and just make sure. But this is another thing that we learned today. So basically the order of the operation matters. Well, it doesn't matter, like if you read it from left to right, so you have to make sure that you encapsulate things the right way. All right, so let me see what else I have here. Okay. So another type of operations that we are going to encounter is, like I said, well, I said division, but divisions are there are multiple parts when you make divisions, right? You have remainder, you have you have division, and the module, for instance. Well, it's pretty much the remainder, or um, and also it comes with understanding the different types or um yeah the it also has to do with the types that are also returned when you do division, for instance. So let's focus on that quickly. Like for instance, let's say you have 10 divided by 2, you know, the result is 5, and pretty much what you get back is a float, right? And we can talk about that later, what a float is and what's called a float. There are other types like that, but you see a 5.0, you don't see 5, which means that this is not an integer. 3 or 2 are integers because they are whole numbers, right? So you have just you don't have a fractional part. So you're gonna find out that um, even when you have a when you expect a number that's supposed to be a whole number like 5, if you use this operator, you're gonna get a float, right? So I was investigating, and Python has a mechanism for you to get an integer instead, or just the if you want to discard the fraction part, you just use 2 forward slashes, and then when you execute it, you see that you get 5 instead of 5.0. So this is something that you can also, or you should keep in mind as well. In a different programming language like JavaScript, this is a comment. I don't even know how to write comment. How you write comment here? I think you use a chart character. Yeah, that's how you do it. This is a comment. That's another thing we learned, how to create a comment. And if you don't know, a comment, it's pretty much a comment. It's not interpreted by the running environment by Python, so it's just bypassed. You see that this is a comment is not printed out or anything, and it doesn't affect the execution of our script. So that's how we create comments. Like for instance, here we are doing division, right? Right. Okay. So another thing is, I mentioned that if you're interested in the remainder of a division, there's also an operator, which is the percentage sign, and it's really important, especially in some algorithms when you need to do module operation. So you see that when you do 10 divided by 2, but we are interested in the remainder or the module, which is the remainder part, you see that the value, if we print it out, is, in this case, is 0, as expected, because 10 divided by 2 equals 5, and there are no remainders, right? But if we do something like 9 module 2, you see that you get 1 as a remainder, or this is what is called a module. So we can talk about that later as well. How to calculate powers? Well, there's also a operator for that, and it's double start. It's also common on other programming languages. On JavaScript, we use this one for power, I guess. But here we use a 2 stars. Like 2 to the power 3 should be 8. So let's see if that's true. If we print power, if we run this, see that it's 8. So it's working. So there's another operator that it comes in handy. You know multiplications already. What else can we learn? We can have a mix of values type, like for instance, you know, if we make b equal to 3.2 and well 2.2 and this one equal to 2.3, you know that should be 4.5. So let me see here. I call this, I don't know, if I call this BC, B plus C should be equal to 4.5. If we print that BC, you see 4.5, which means that you can add float numbers, but also you can add integers with decimal numbers or float numbers or double numbers, but here we have float numbers. Yeah, 4.3. So that also works as well. So something I haven't mentioned, and that's where the magic of Python relies. If you know about other programming languages like C or C++, or Java, let me mention Java. Those are strictly typed programming languages where you have to specify the type, or Rust or Go, for instance, where you have to declare the type. Modern language like Rust and Go, the programming language can infer the type of an element at runtime, or let me see, at compilation time. So those programming languages, they can infer the type of an element, but also you can specify the type. Here in Python, sorry, you don't have to. So you see that in other programming language, you would need to indicate, for instance, that this is an integer, and here this is a float. Actually, it seems to work, which means that you can do it. It's just that the programming language, like on PHP, the programming language infers that by itself. So let's see if it works. Yeah. In Python, you can specify the type of a variable, and that's how you do it. You do semicolon, and then you specify the type. But let's say what happened if I do float here, even though I'm passing an integer, would that work? Yeah, still work. Let me see. BC, yeah. So I don't know how relevant that is. Do I have a string type or str? It's still 5.3. Sorry, 4.3. So I don't know. It's a little bit weird because it should break, because I'm saying that this variable should be accepting a string, but it's getting a integer. And here, if I say this is of type integer, it's getting a float number. Shouldn't print that out as a valid output. So let's not focus on that. That's a advanced topic, so I need to figure that out. But all I want to make sure we understand is that Python, you by default, you don't have to specify the type that a variable will hold. And we can talk about that later. So speaking of numbers, something else that it's important to mention is there are functions as well for doing other type of operations. Like for instance, let me see. There are functions also when it comes to working with numbers that you can use. Like, let's see, let's make sure that this is 2.6. Like, we can round numbers as well. Also, you can call, like, you can do operations here, for instance, inside of the print. You see 11, 9 plus 2, or you can also call, you can pass the result of a function like this. You say round BC, there's a function that rounds the number. You see 5. So you're rounding the result of B plus C, which is 2.2 plus 2.6 equal to 4.6. And then the round function is rounding that value to the ceiling, right? Not to the floor, but to the ceiling, which means that the next whole number would be 5. I think that rounding to the floor is also, let me see, it will be possible. I don't know if they have a floor. Let's see. Or maybe the round function has other argument that you can. Also here, take a look at this. On the code editor, you can also learn about more information about the function. If you hover over the function, in this case round, it gives you a definition of the function. So here you see the round. This function rounds a number to a given precision in decimal digits, and the return value is an integer. If n digits is omitted or none, otherwise the return value has the same type as the number, and digits might be negative. And so you can round to a given number of integers, right? Like for instance, if I pass a second argument, like 2, you see that I get 4.6. And if I round to one decimal, still 4.6. If I pass none or 0, it would round it to just one decimal point. But you see that, let me see, before we have 4.6, but now just 5.0. And when we don't specify any, it's just an integer, like the documentation says. So you can learn more about these functions here by just hovering. So the way you read it is, like you can read a definition about the function, but also you can see the arguments the function takes. Here you see it takes 2 arguments. When we have when you have a definition like this, like number column, and then this is the type, right? So you have the type defined here, and this arrow, and the let me see, and the arrow tells you pretty much the type that gets returned. In this case, it returns an integer by default. All right. So what else can we talk about briefly? So another vital element. So we talked about numbers. We can also briefly talk about strings as well, because you will find yourself doing a lot of operations with strings. And I think we can finish with that. Yeah, let's talk about strings, and then we can finish the live stream. Then I can do a homework and just learn more about it. Not sure if I'm gonna get hooked to this, but I've been learning a lot. I think it's a really great opportunity to learn something by just extending whatever knowledge I have coming from other programming languages. Um, so yeah, so far we learned how to create a variable, what the sign, the equal sign means, which means assignment. We learned that we can assign different things to a variable. We can assign an integer, we can assign a float or a decimal number. We can assign a string, which is what we describe with semicolons, like here, you know. And you can do numerical operations and assign them to a variable. You can get the whole number or an integer from a division by using double forward slash. You can get the module by using the percentage sign. You can do a power operation by using two stars. You know how to create a now you know how to create a comment by using the chart, and also you can combine different numerical or different numerical types. Like for instance, you have a float here and an integer, and you are doing a addition with those different types, and then what you get, and pretty much the programming language handles what type should be returned. You can also use functions for doing mathematical operations, like for instance, rounding a number. You can learn about that function or any other function by just hovering on the function names if you're using VS Code. And you also learn about the importance of doing or using parentheses, because they will rule the presence over the next operation. So when you have numerical operations, when you have mathematical operations, don't focus on, do not rest assured that they will be executed by the way that they've been outlined on the line. So use parentheses as much as you can just to make sure that the operation is the one that you expect. And this is pretty much all you have to do in order to learn about like numbers on Python. And I can't believe I learned all this by just teaching you that. So let's talk about strings. Besides numbers, Python can also manipulate strings, which can be expressed in several ways, and they can be enclosed in single quotes and or double quotes with the same result. And the back slash can use to escape or also to send a specific or a different instruction to the string when the string is interpolated. This is a concept also in programming language when you interpolate a string, and we can talk about that quickly. So, what is a string? I told you a string, like let me call it something like I create a variable called text, and I'm going to assign a string. So this is a string, but also this is a string. So you can use double quotes or single quotes to create a string on Python. So a string, the name comes from, it just implies that a number of characters are attached together and in a linear way. And when you put them together, so you pretty much have a string of characters, right? So when you have a, for instance, like this is a string made of just the a character. When you have a, b, c, this is a string made of two characters, right? And so a string is a collection of characters of n length, if you will, where n is the number of characters denoted on the in the string. So that's where, for instance, when you type "hello world," this is called a string, where you have characters from the English alphabet, and you have a space, and then you have more letters or characters from the English alphabet. And so this is what we call string. And you see that there are, like I said before, there are different ways of creating string. So you can use double quotes or you can use single quotes. And you see that the code editor doesn't yell at me. Both are good. It's only that the only problem is that I'm using the same variable name. So let's try to print a string. It's pretty much the same way we did it before. You see? And then when I run this, let me see this part here. Let me make sure that this is visible. Okay. There you go. So after running the command, you get hello. Hello world and hello world. Let me call this hello world too. When you run this, you see that both strings are valid strings. All right. So, but what happens if I have, for instance, if I want to say hello my world and my should be should have double quote inside. You see that the code editor is complaining here. It says that a statement must be separated by new lines or semicolons. So there's something wrong happening. So basically, because we're using double quotes to indicate to the programming language that this is a string, when the string itself has a double quote as well, it's gonna break the basically the scope that limits what this string is. So there's some way to escape this, and one way is using the backslash, like this, right? So we added before the double quote, and basically that escape the double quote character. So which means that in English, what that means is that Python won't see that character as a string. It's not gonna try to read this as a new string inside of string, but instead it's just a double quote character that should be printed out. Let me just comment this out. By doing that, Python won't execute this line because this is a comment. And let me just focus on, actually, let me do it with the other one instead. And you see that, oh, sorry, it's the first one. That's the one that has to change the text. So when I run it, you see that it says hello, and then you have my with double quotes. And so we're escaping that because the double quote has also a specific meaning to the programming language. It's used to denote a string. But also, another thing we could do, well, probably not what we wanted, but if you wanted to highlight my, like for instance, you could have used a single quote and they would have worked because they're not used initially to denote that this is a string. So you see that when I run this, I get my single quotes here and it works. But they would not work here, for instance. Like if I added to this one, we're gonna have the same problem like before because the programming language believes that, okay, this is a string, but then what is this, right? It doesn't understand what that is. It thinks that it's another string, but it isn't because, this is not the way that you create a string. So you will need to do the same thing here. You need to escape and that single quote by using the backslash, and that way escaping that character, the single quote, because that's the one we're using to denote a string, right? So you also gonna find, well, for instance, you see that if you create a string like hello, like let's say something like his, like Carlos' car is blue, you see that it works because you can have inside a double quote, you can have single quotes without any problem, like as many as you need. But here, if you're using single quotes to define a string and you have the same situation, the same text, see that it breaks, and it's because you're starting with a single quote, and then this one is breaking the whole string, so you need to escape it, right? So that's an important aspect. You're gonna find that in any programming language, so it's important you know it. And so let's move on. So another character, but first let me make sure that I print those texts just to make sure that they work. You see Carlos car, it's blue. Well, let me call this red. So Carlos car is red for the first one, and then Carlos car is blue is the second one. So both are working. But what if I want blue and red to come or to go to the next line? There's a special character for that, or instruction, which is \n, and that stands for new line. So you're basically sending, you are creating a new line, and then whatever comes next is being printed on the next line. And let's see it working. You see Carlos car is red. Red was sent to the next line, and that's how you do it with this with this instruction. \n means new line. So another thing that I learned was that what happened if you have something like, let's create a variable called dir for directory. You know that, for instance, in Windows you have something like C column, and then I don't know, \some, then you have name. If we print out there, you can see that, and we want that to be printed in one line. You see that Python is reading this part here as a new line instruction, and that's not what we want, right? So how do we escape that? Well, can we escape it with another one like we were doing it before for any other special characters? Let's see. Yes, we can do that. And I didn't know I could. It's just like coming from another programming language is really powerful, because in other programming languages like in PHP, I don't know, in JavaScript that would be possible. But I remember PHP you could do that. You add two backslashes, and then that's like negating the previous one. Even though and you can see on the code editor that first, when you have just one, it's yellow, but if you add a second one, it becomes let me just open this a little more. Okay, and then you see that it's gone. But there's another way. You can also specify an AR here. Let me see, is that true? R, can you add an R? Well, on the print statement you can add a can you? No, sorry. I mean, before the string, this is weird. You can add an R, and that pretty much works as well. And R stands for raw. So this is a raw text. And I haven't seen something like that. It might be a macro or something on this programming language, but it seems to work. So there are different ways of bypassing special instructions inside of a string. Like, for instance, the special instruction \n, which stands for new line. If you pass an R before the string declaration, when you print that, so no special rule will be applied. So this will be treated as normal text, and it's gonna be treated as raw text, and this won't break the line. So you see that it's printed on the same line. But if we remove this, you see that basically the text is broken into two lines, some, and then you see that even the n is not available because the n is a special instruction. But also there's another way to bypass that, and it's adding two backslashes as well. So that's another important things that we should learn if we're using Python. So another thing also that is important, comes in handy, and I think it's going to be the last thing I'm going to be talking about. So we have concatenation and also multiple like how can you print in multiple lines without having to use the end character. Like for instance, let me just give you this as an example. Like if you have a, I'm gonna focus on text alone, like here. I'm gonna remove this line. So Carlos car is red, and then you see that I'm sending red to the next line. Carlos car is, or for instance, I can say Carlos car is, and then you see red here. But what if I have a larger text, like something else and more data that I want to print out, right? So you see that this is what I get. Carlos car is red, but then this is appended to the same line still because we didn't indicate that. Okay, so I want the next part to be on the next line. We can add a new one, right? So Carlos car is red, and then something else like a paragraph. You can even repeat this multiple times. But what happens if I add a if I hit enter and I go to the next line? You see that now it's broken. So the code editor is telling me that something is wrong with it. And why is that? Well, it's because of the interpreter, right? So Python is each line. In other programming languages, you have something like a semicolon. I don't even know if you can use a semicolon here, semicolon. But basically, Python understands that each instruction happens in, like, each new line is pretty much like a new instruction. Like, if I hit enter and I go to a line, even though I'm inside of the string, it thinks that the text it's unterminated, right? So the string literal is unterminated, and the string literal is pretty much the information that we have here. So, and the reason is because the new line, it doesn't understand what that's new line is now. But there's a way to bypass this. Like if you want to pretty much have multiple lines, like here, like like if you want to have something like, I'm going to copy and paste this multiple times. You see that it's broken. I'm not even gonna, well, you see that it's broken. It's giving me an error. We're gonna talk about error later. But there's a way to bypass this, and the way to do that is by using 3 double quotes like this, and then you can have multiple lines. You can be more free to to add more text, and you don't have to add that special character to have multiple lines. You see that if I print this out, let me see if that's true. Let me just exit this, clear this, run it again. Okay, so you see. So here now I don't need to add that special new line character by using the 3 double quotes. I can pretty much, like whatever I type is like the way that I type it, whatever in whatever format I type my text, that's gonna be the way that it's gonna be output. Hello guys, this is me. Thank you for watching. And then here's a Anthony Rudd. And I don't know, return to. And you see that because I'm typing this way and I'm using 3 double quotes, I see that the output will be exactly that. You see? So there's no need to add a special \n just to get this format. So that's really handy. You see that it doesn't even work in multiple lines. I will need to just write everything in one line. And then if I format this using the special character for new line, you say, hello guys, this is me, and then new line. You can even have multiple new lines, like 2 new lines. Then thank you for watching. And then I add a new line here. And I'm gonna add 3 new lines. It's like hitting enter 3 times in normal editing, and then adding another one, and then if I run that, you see that I get this format. You see, hello guys, this is me. Like if I want to have more space before the hello guy, I just, I would add more new lines as needed. If I run that again, you see that now I have all this space, right? And then hello guys, which is different from the previous one, which was just hello guys, and that's it. So that's also handy, like when you are creating a program and you need to give a message very quickly, and you want to just copy and paste it or just type in whatever format you expect the message to be printed out. So you use 3 double quotes and then, like hello, and then just format the text whatever way you need it, like hello, welcome to the game. And then I don't know, whatever it is that you want to communicate. Like if you want that exactly that printed out, like you see, that's what you get. This is your program working. So now you're interacting, you're programming a computer to give you whatever information you need. And this is the power of programming. This is the power of programming a computer. And let me see what else. There's a concept of concatenation. Let me just delete all of this. I'm gonna go back to my example, hello, text 1, and then text 2. I can have word. This is a good example because I'm gonna create a variable called return. Result. This is a great example because, like, for instance, if you are processing a CSV file or whatever file, and you know that you have cells, columns, and sometimes you probably want to combine things together. Like for instance, you can have the first name. You can also create a variable like whatever the way you need. I think that you need to start with a non-numerical. Yeah, a numerical character to create a variable, like for instance first, and then you can have whatever you want, like you can have numbers or whatever if you need, or a dash or whatever. No, you cannot have a dash, can you? No, you cannot. But you can have this, like first name, like for instance Anthony, then last name is, I don't know, Anthony Art. So if you're processing a CSV and you have columns, in one column you have first names and in the other columns you have last name, but you want to combine their first name and last name to make their full name, so you can do something like this, which is called concatenation. So you can have full name equal to first name plus last name. So the plus sign doesn't mean that you are adding 2 strings. Well, it means that you are pretty much concatenating 2 strings, but you can also think that you're adding 2 strings. It's only that the result is not a number. So it's putting together things, right? Putting together 2 strings. So you can use this is also the way that you do it on PHP. Let me see. No, you use I think in PHP you use the dot. If I'm mistaken, this is the way you use it in JavaScript. You use a plus sign. Yeah. So when you run this, you can see Anthony R together, but normally, you want to get a space between the first name and last name. So you can add it here, right? So this is how you do it, but you see that nothing will change because this is a empty string, but here is a string with a space character inside. It's only that we don't see it. So now you see that you have Anthony R as the full name, and that's how you do string concatenation, which is another operation when working with strings. You can also concatenate whatever you want, as long as you use a plus sign. Like you can add another string, like a comma, and you see that you have Anthony Rodriguez, and then let's add the age, for instance. let's say I'm 22 years old, and you see that Anthony Rodriguez, but we forgot about adding the space. Also, we can add it here, like before that, and you see that you have Anthony R, comma, and then space 22, or you can do the same thing and add the space again here before that, and just how you format it. So you see that you can also have numbers, but you, when it comes to numbers, I think you don't have to even have a make it a string. You can also just have the whole integer expressed here, and well, actually, it doesn't work. And that's interesting. I think that also happens on JavaScript or PHP as well. Like if you add the number there, but I think that wouldn't be the case if I added in the beginning. Or if you had 22 plus that, let me see. Yeah, it still fails. Okay, so you would need to, oh, hold on. Yeah, you need to make sure that when you are concatenating strings, you surround them with double quotes. Forgive me, I don't know this programming language. We're learning together, and yeah, we now know that. Um, so in Python, there's also a operator for repeating strings, which also comes in handy. Like for instance, the full, if we print out, we can print out, or we can assign R 3 times. See that R is stored on here. You see R is stored on the last name. You can say last name. You can say 3 times last name will be full name, and then when you run that, you get RRR. This is also very handy. I never seen that in other programming language. It's the first time I see it, and so it might be really powerful. Think about, I don't know, cases where you need to create random characters, and this is a handy way. Like you can have it 100 times, and you see you have it here 100 times. Like for instance, let's say that I want the hash character multiplied, I'm sorry, here 100 times. That's how I would do it. You see, I got it 100 times here. And then if I want a new line, as we learn, and we want to print out something like hello world, you're gonna get something like this. And if you want the line again, the same number of lines, you just add it here. And this is the power of variables. It's like you can reuse them, you can assign them, you can change them. You see that I'm using full name here, and I'm using full name here again, but I'm just gonna call that lines, right? Which are the, like I don't know, hash. You see, I have all these lines made of hashes, and then you have hello world, and then you're repeating the same one again. All right, so it says also that if you want to concatenate, there's another way. If you have two strings next to each other, like Anthony and then space and then R, and you assign that to a variable like full name, that space between two strings on the same line will get concatenated without the plus sign. That's also powerful. So if I print full name, you see that we have the same result as before, but we don't have this space. And I think that if I add a new one with space, you see that it's added. So this is another way of formatting our strings very quickly without much of overhead. And I think this is where the power of Python comes in handy. It's that we don't need so much syntax or so much boilerplate to get something working. Like the interface or the programming language is so easy to use. It has so many macros like these ones that you don't need to rely on like much structure or like a lot of things convoluting your document with like those syntax, but instead you can just use shortcuts like these ones just to get the work done. Like if I add a space here and then a comma and then 22, I pretty much have the same results before without having all those plus signs like, like before, which pretty much makes all of this so ugly and confusing. So instead of doing that, I can also concatenate strings like this. And this is really cool when you're just reading, when you're pretty much reading different variables and you need to combine them or concatenate them together. Would that work with strings like this? Like you have a space, for instance, and I add it here without the plus sign, obviously. Would that work? It doesn't work, right? So that's cool. So you cannot have a variable there. It wouldn't work. So that works only when you have like explicit definitions of strings on the same line. Okay, perfect. So what else? I would say that's it. We learn about concatenation this way. Well, I can mention that a string is pretty much a array of character or also a slice. But we can talk about that in another video. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this live stream. Thank you so much for watching. I don't even know how many people watched this, but I'm gonna put up the video on my channel. Yeah, so I got a feedback here. So I'm happy you enjoy it. Like I'm gonna try to make another video where we continue learning about this, but so far the experience has been really great. I've been able to learn a programming language that I never touched before by just trying to use my knowledge for another programming language and pretty much just following a document that I have here and trying to make sense of it. So what I can tell is, in my experience having done this, is that it's pretty easy to learn. There's so many powerful functionalities that you don't have in other programming languages when it comes to getting the work done. And that's probably why this programming language is so popular. So thank you so much, guys. If you like this, make sure you comment below, subscribe to the channel, like it, share it, whatever you want. But thank you so much for watching. I see you later. Bye bye.